Good afternoon, everyone. I can see we have people joining us. Apologies for the slight delay, a technical hitch, but not the first time this happened, and it probably won't be the last when we're doing webinars. I hope it's nice and sunny where you are. I'm down in Cornwall and the weather is beautiful, but I'm sure that will change quite quickly. Delighted, as always, to introduce one of our webinars. We have the marvellous HireVue with us today. I know there's a heap of content to get through and a really fantastic couple of panelists as well. So I'm not going to delay things. I would just ask that if you do have a question, could you please pop it in the Q&A box rather than the chat box? You can say hi to each other in chat. But if you put the questions in there, it's much easier to manage at the end for me. So please do that. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce James McGill from HireVue. Hi, James.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Unlocking Potential in Graduate Talent, how to use skills, science, and AI to identify your stars of tomorrow. So my name is James McGill, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Success here at HireVue. And just a few quick words about who HireVue is, if you're not aware. We're a hiring platform. We offer structured interviews, assessments, scheduling capability, and a conversational AI capability as well on our platform. We're very fortunate to have over 1,200 clients globally, which is also includes 60% of the Fortune 100. And through our customer base, we've managed to achieve over 70 million video interviews and assessments over our history and 200 million chats as well. And in terms of our client base, as I said, 60% of the Fortune 100 are a really rich roster of clients that we've got that we're very, very proud of partnering with. So to get things started, I've just done a very quick introduction of myself there, but I'd really like to hand over to our panelists. So James, if I could hand over to you and ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure, no problem. Hi, everyone. It's fantastic to have the opportunity to join you today and obviously talk through a really important topic. My name is James Gordanifer. I lead talent acquisition for all of our early careers hires at WTW, or formerly known as Willis Towers Watson. We hire around 1,200 or so apprentices, interns, grads, and so on across the early careers landscape. Across a whole range of locations globally. And we currently work and partner with HireVue and use their HireVue assessment product to help us do that. And obviously, I'll be talking a little bit more about that through today's webinar.
That's great. Thank you, James. I'm not on mute, am I? I just want to double check. Yeah, James, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us today on this panel. Tom, if I can hand over to you and ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, James. And James, hi, everyone. Tom Cornell. I'm a senior occupational psychology consultant at HireVue, which is a bit of a mouthful, but essentially means I'm part of the team that specialises in the design, implementation, and the maintenance of our different assessment solutions. Been with the company for almost 6 years. My 6th anniversary is next week. And I have been based out of London, down in Sydney for a few years, and currently based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. So bit of experience working with the different ways companies handle and geographies handle graduate hiring from across the globe.
That's great, Tom. Thank you so much. Okay, so to give you all an idea of how this agenda is going to unfold over the next hour or so, in a moment, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the research, and then we're going to get into 4 key areas of the research and themes that have come out around global graduate recruitment outlook, the shift to skills-based hiring globally, global recruitment resourcing, and then we're going to finish it off looking at global acceptance of AI. And the way this is all going to work is I'm going to give a kind of a brief summary, and then I'm going to ask our expert panelists sort of chime in with their thoughts and ideas, observations in terms of the subject matter at hand. And then finally, we'll hand it over to questions. And so if I could ask you to submit your questions via the Q&A as we go, that would be terrific. Okay, so the research. So first global picture of early career hiring trends delivered through industry body data, and I'm delighted that HireVue has been able to partner with the Institute of Student Employers in the UK, the National Association of College and Employers in the US, and the Australian Association of Graduate Employers, of course, in Australia. This report is going to be sent out to everybody. So in the next few days, please expect to see this coming in your inbox. And once again, thank you for all our partners for helping to pull this report together. So we're going to start with a poll question, and I believe that poll question is going to populate on the screen now. So if you wouldn't mind taking a look at the question and then selecting all that apply, we'll give you guys sort of 20, 30 seconds to complete. Okay, so I think that's probably long enough. Thank you for those who've completed the poll. It will certainly help drive some of the conversation as we go through the remaining parts of the webinar. Okay. Oh, sorry, back one. So as I said, 4 key themes. The first one is around global graduate recruitment outlook. And a couple of areas, or 3 areas really there. The first is that the early careers job market is holding strong, with the traditional industry showing the most resilience, that the number of applications per role continues to rise around the world globally, and that candidates are reneging and disengagement rates remain high. And that's an issue for employers. So some of the sort of the key stats that's come out of this, firstly, that roles are forecasted to grow in the UK by 5% over 23-24. That 3/4, three-quarters in the US of employees rate the job market to be good, if not excellent, and that 3/5 of Australian employment growth will occur in high-skill jobs over the next 5 years. So with that, I'm going to ask the guys to participate, and I'm going to ask James. Could you give your perspective on these findings? Are you seeing similar within your world? Anything different that you'd like to call out?
Yeah, there's a number of things playing out at the minute that I see through the lens of early careers globally. I think the nature of how work is changing and skill shortages within organisations is placing a light on early careers. So I'm not surprised that there's a consistent demand and in some cases an increase as well, because there's an opportunity to really influence the influx of skills that you hire and build for, particularly at this part of the talent life cycle. I think definitely in terms of applications, we've seen a massive surge this year, and I think that lends itself to the whole piece around your ability to handle volume is critical, and being more efficient, with your time, so that people aren't being sucked into dealing with that and are spending time on value add activity. I think the nature of programs in early careers as well is under a microscope at the moment. And what I mean by that is organizations are changing their outlook and their perspective. There's a lot about organizations moving to a skills-based organization, for example, and the evolution of skills with, jobs that haven't even been created yet, and so everybody's tackling and dealing with that. And they're asking a question, well, are we hiring into rigid early careers programs that are really aligned to a vertical need, when actually we're not going to be built that way in 5 years' time? So there's a question mark as to actually what is the future of early careers and what are the future of early careers programs. I also think that the agility and mobility of talent is really relevant in that sense. So coming back to the whole idea of building something vertically that is quite rigid, it doesn't really work for how an organization is likely to operate in the next kind of 5 to 10 years, which is much more fluid, and resource moving around an organization based on where the need is. I think that has to be baked into early careers from the outset, and that's really difficult because often hiring managers, line managers, businesses are very protective over their programs, very protective over their talent, but actually it's counterintuitive to the greater good. And the last thing I'll call out in terms of a global outlook, something I'm seeing play out, is work readiness. And I think this is in a number of senses. Some people will come at it from the angle of generational difference, and Gen Z are raised on screens and on phones, and they can't communicate and they can't talk to people. You hear a lot of this kind of stuff flying around. But then I think what you've also got is the compounded impact of the pandemic, and we're really seeing that play out now in terms of young people's confidence. So I think that businesses have a role to play in that transition, and supporting individuals with their work readiness and making sure that they, kind of play a role in really setting them up for success. And I don't think anyone's necessarily got that nailed, but it's something we're all grappling with. And it links to your point about reneges and declines, because part of that starts before they even join. And so keep warm initiatives and engagement. I think there's a real opportunity there to help with people's acclimatization, orientation before they even start, and get them embedded in, what it means to work in your organization and the world of work, and help them with their speed to productivity once they join. That will also help reduce declines and reneges as well.
That's great. Thanks, James. That's really, really insightful. Thank you for sharing all of that. Tom, if I could hand over to you and ask you to give your perspective on the data and perhaps share what the future of might look like for graduate recruitment trends.
Yeah, so we're certainly seeing the rise in recruitment volumes in our customers as well, the individuals who I'm working with. That's definitely picked up quite a lot. And I do think that this is likely to continue to trend upwards, especially for the in the graduate space. James alluded to that volume element. Those individuals who are now applying for graduate roles are very technology savvy. They've grown up with smartphones. It's not that they've grown up with internet. They've grown up with AI being all the talk, and everything is technology. And so I think that's likely to then play out into how they actually go out and look for work and apply for roles as well. I think you're probably going to start finding that even though there may be the same number of graduates, there may be more applications coming from them, and perhaps better honed and crafted applications, because there are technologies and tools out there that allow them to more rapidly apply with stronger applications to roles that are out there in the market. So absolutely, the employers have to be ready on their side to help manage, I guess, the technology that this very technology-driven generation is going to be utilizing. I think I really like, James, your point around kind of that work readiness. This is something that also really springs to mind that we're hearing sort of anecdotally from customers, but you're also seeing a few reports and things online around how Gen Z, those who are really primarily making up your graduate applicants, their expectations or the, I guess, what used to be the norms around how you would approach a hiring process or an interview perhaps aren't there anymore. We hear recruiters saying, our Gen Z is so unprofessional, they turn up in jeans and a t-shirt, or there was talk around individuals, not a huge amount, but saying, people turn up with a parent or a friend to an interview to kind of like just be there for support. And okay, that might seem strange to us dinosaurs, but you've got to remember, this is a generation who spent the last years of school and their university degrees perhaps working, from their parents' bedroom in their pajamas virtually. So they haven't had the same experience or exposure or expectations around then that step into what the current world of work looks like. And then also bearing in mind that different organizations now have varying expectations. Some are working from home 5 days a week. Some are fully back to office. Some have gone back to formal dress. Others are staying casual. Some don't allow any use of technology. Gen AI is blacklisted. Others say use technology as much as you want. So you can't have an expectation that these grads have a shared understanding of what you as an organization expect from them. So it's worth making sure that's clear when you're setting them up in your recruitment process.
It's great. Thank you, Tom. James, before we move to the next section, I'm just wondering whether there's anything you wanted to chime in on what Tom said there.
No, I think he's hit some really important kind of anecdotes and points. So no, absolutely fine. Let's move on.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right. So theme number two, and James alluded to this in in the last section, is around the shift towards skills-based hiring. To sort of sum it up here, skills continue to become the currency of hiring. But what we're finding is that many organizations are at the very early stages of their journey on this. The changing nature of jobs, talent shortages, and company growth are placing an increased emphasis on skills-based hiring. And interesting that the top in-demand skills revolve around digital and IT, which is perhaps no surprise, but borne out in the research. Some sort of interesting statistics that came out of this: less than 40% of employees are screening candidates by GPA, meaning a grade point average in the US. That 54% of employers expect to move to a skills-based recruitment approach, which I think is very interesting, and that only 30% of Australian employers use results on selection and recruitment. So Tom, perhaps if we can start with you on this particular theme. So can you perhaps start with giving an overview of skills-based hiring and give some best practices on how organizations might start their overall approach to a skills-based hiring method?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, skills-based hiring is not, like, I don't know, a bunch of psychologists in a lab suddenly found, hey, there's something we're not assessing people on, or did you know there's this ability or this trait that people have we didn't know about before? Rather, I think it's more a shift on the organizational side around how we frame, I guess, skills gaps and assessing individuals to fill those gaps. It's a big shift on trying to focus on what kind of really matters for someone's ability to do the job and try to blur out those things that don't matter. It's not about sort of dehumanizing people, reducing candidates just a few numbers on a page. But as we're seeing these increasing volumes, you need to find a way to objectively and consistently assess a cohort of people's suitability for a job. This is what IO's been trying to push for years. All good practice start with a job analysis, identify the skills required for a job, incorporate that throughout your hiring process. So you're testing candidates on those specific things, and move away from perhaps just a general thumbs up, thumbs down from a recruiter or a hiring manager. But of course, it can be overwhelming. We're not expecting or saying you have to do a full multi-year mapping of your organization, all roles and eventualities, identify the gaps, and then that's a huge undertaking. You don't have to go in at the deep end. There are tools and resources out there that can help you on that journey to start at least bringing a more skills-based approach to what it is that you're doing. Whether that is with some of the vendors or the companies you partner with. Companies out there, us included, have tools that will help support and give advice on what skills or abilities might be required for a job and give some starting points on what interview questions to ask or how to approach that. Or you can kind of go straight to the source for some of these online databases. Like ONET is a great online repository of many different occupations and the typical responsibilities and skills required to be successful on the job. Of course, it's going to be very different, or could be different to your organization, exactly what these roles do and what is required for them. But this can give you a starting point so that most of the heavy lifting is done. And then perhaps you're engaging with experts within the organization to say, hey, this is what we think the profile for this role looks like. That's what we're going to incorporate into the interview and the hiring process. Does that look right? Are we missing anything? Then it's just a case of tweaking it rather than starting from scratch, which can be quite overwhelming.
Okay, thank you, Tom. James, if I can hand over to you, kind of sort of three layers to this question. First off, what's your perspective on the data? Could you share where you're currently at on your journey with skills-based hiring with WTW? And then finally, any gotchas, any lessons learned along the way that you feel would be useful to share with our audience today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been involved with skills-based hiring for about 10 years now. And, it's particularly prevalent in early careers, but it's starting to seep into experienced hire now as well. And I'm definitely a massive advocate of this. And to be honest, I'm not surprised that the data is pointing towards, you know, an increase in this approach. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, one of the things, and hearing Tom just talk as well, like I don't understand how you can, there's a lot of narrative out there at the minute about a skills-based organization. And I don't understand how you can have a skills-based organization without a skills-based hiring process, because otherwise you're not comparing apples with apples. And I think there are examples of organizations that are doing one without the other. And that might, you know, some people might argue that that's possible, but I'm not sure how it is. And I think there's a general shift to bring the world of talent acquisition and talent and development together, so that you're looking at kind of how the whole thing unifies and speaks the same language, and that there's a feedback loop between performance in role and what you're recruiting for in the process, and a constant iteration between the two. I see that as crucial in early careers, and I've seen that work really well, and I've seen it work badly where things are doing, you know, functions are doing things in silos. So I think that's a really important kind of lesson for me, is the unification of that kind of talent and development landscape into recruitment, and obviously what happens when someone is in the business and in the life cycle. I also think there's some interesting points that I'm not sure we've necessarily called out yet as well, which is why this is becoming more prevalent. I think one of those things is about and it was mentioned in the previous kind of section, which is candidate behavior and the use of AI to support recruitment processes in terms of their search. And the reason I see this as important is because more and more candidates are actually openly using Gen AI to help refine a cover letter or a CV, or even in some cases use Gen AI in a recruitment process. And actually, there are different types of tools as we know. There are some that you can kind of, you know, are open access and you can utilize. There are others that you can pay for, and, you know, will give you the best chances of success. But how does that drive equity in the market? If certain candidates have access to better AI to improve their CV or their cover letter, how is that fair? So I think skills-based hiring, you know, provides a really important role to play here to help level that playing field and assess people based on their capability rather than what they're saying they've done. And I suppose the other aspect here as well, and, you know, stick my neck out here, but there's a question to say, you know, are recruiters and businesses faced now with a level of misinformation that they have to sift through? And obviously there's the whole piece around candidate cheating. So I'm not going to go on to that, but I think misinformation is something, you know, that could really be a concern within organizations. And so if you're constantly assessing for what somebody said they've done through what they've written, or indeed what they're saying in an interview, then you're susceptible, and you're not necessarily getting to the best candidates. The other aspect here as well, which I'm a massive advocate of, is it massively opens your talent pool in terms of where you can fish, and so that really supports not just skills but also diversity and social mobility as well. So, you know, really important aspect. I think one of the things that I've observed, and I continue to observe even within my organization, is it's almost a philosophical shift, because you really are moving away from, you know, something that people find quite comforting around credentials, what school you went to, what grades you got, you know, that kind of sense of prestige, I guess, that is associated with that in some respect, to, and I'm not saying that those things aren't important, but moving away from those as being criteria to focusing on actually what can this candidate do and how can they demonstrate it, i.e. what potential do they have? And that's a philosophical shift, you know, and that's hard for business stakeholders to stomach. They don't live and breathe recruitment the way that we do, because we work in this and we understand it and we're at the kind of cutting edge, I suppose. You know, they are doing something else that adds value for the business. And this is, you know, like I say, a philosophical shift. And so you've really got to be able to influence and take them on that journey. And that, you know, my experience has been really difficult. In some cases, some areas have a fixed mindset. And no matter how much data you put in front of them, they really struggle to get on board with this approach. And so it's a constant tension, I would say. And from a WTW point of view, you know, we've obviously move to much more of an emphasis on testing for capability, rather than focusing on academic attainment. It's not to say, like I say, that it's not important, or they don't have the opportunity to showcase it in the process, but it's context rather than the criteria. Does that make sense?
It does, and yeah, thank you, James. That was really insightful. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Okay, before we move on to the next theme, I just wanted to remind everyone to continue to submit their questions as we go through the remainder of the presentation. Okay, so let's move on to the next theme, which is around global recruiting resourcing. And with a volatile global economy, we wanted to understand how this was impacting recruiting and affecting a team's ability to cope with demand. So with budgets being squeezed, recruitment headcount remains the same or is reduced slightly. It's probably not so much of a surprise. However, application numbers are increasing as graduates apply for more roles. And employers are looking at new technologies such as automation to improve processes and efficiency, and to adapt to changing candidate expectations. So some of the kind of the statistics that were borne out through the research that we did is that graduate applications are up 38% in the UK and nearly 100% in Australia. That days from interview to offer have risen in the US to 25.1. That 45% of organizations taking between 30 and 60 days from application to offer in Australia, and that 37% of organizations are taking between 90 and 120 days. And that finally 17% of candidates in Australia renege on offers, 23 in the UK, and leading the way with 31% in the US. So with all that in mind, James, at Willis Towers Watson, using technology to create efficiencies while still delivering a positive experience for candidates, how are you going about that?
Yeah, and this is a constant evolution. I would be remiss of me to try and say we're the best case study in the world and we've got everything absolutely nailed. This is a multi-year approach in terms of iteration and testing what works and adapting to the market and honing your approach. And we're definitely in the kind of the epicenter of that. We're about 2 years into a technology journey, really. We rolled out a new ATS back in 2022, and like most rollouts of a global solution, it was bumpy, and we're starting to see some of the benefits now of the changes that we've made. But I'd say we've got another year or so until we're really happy with where we've iterated this. So I suppose that's probably my first point, is this takes time. I don't think you can nail it in one season or in one hit, and you will learn things as you go. So, and some of the context that we're working with, I think you mentioned about increases in applications. We've seen a 50% increase in applications to our early career programs. Part of that is we're pushing employer brand harder, and we'll only continue to drive that even more. But I think it's the state of the market, which you also reference as well. If we did nothing, we'd naturally see an increase. So in order to handle that, you've got to have an effective technology solution in place across a number of different platforms. For me, that always starts with your ATS, or applicant tracking system. It underpins everything you do. It's the linchpin. It's like the conveyor belt of your process. Not that we want a conveyor belt recruitment process, but you kind of know what I mean. And I think you've got to really kind of, first you've got to select a product. And if you don't have that luxury, you've got to work with a product and optimize it to its fullest extent. And you've got to be like a dog with a bone. Like, if I think about the past, like I say, 2 years here, I've probably irritated the hell out of our IT kind of technology teams because of my multitude of requests, but they're all born out of improving a candidate experience. So you've got to kind of have this true north in mind, is what are you trying to achieve? You know, is it about high touch candidate experience? Is it about pace of delivery? Is it about great candidate feedback? Is it about ensuring, you know, that there is automation between, you know, you've got to have a really clear vision of what it is you're trying to achieve, and you really got to push for that. So, you know, we've switched on everything we possibly can around an automated workflow, because we want to remove human intervention, not because we want to reduce team members or any of that stuff. We want them higher up in the value chain. We want them with high touch activity, with the right candidates doing the right activity, so that we can make a meaningful impact. And that's why we need technology, not just to enhance the efficiency because of the volume, but also to improve the overall experience, so that people can be more kind of human centric and candidate facing. So that's the driver, our true north in terms of what's driving this kind of like focus. We've done things like switch on pre-screening questions, you know, and already I can tell you, so we had 65,000 applications for this campaign. I think we're still ticking over in some areas. You know, 15% of those candidates that apply to us are not relevant for the programs. They don't meet necessarily the specific criteria that fit those programs. And the pre-screening questions have reduced that volume by 15% before we even do anything. You know, so there's a business case in itself in terms of time saved and efficiency and so on. We've used HireVue assessments, which I know we're probably going to talk more about. That's automated in terms of once they come through the application and the pre-screening, they're automatically receiving an invite to the HireVue assessments, and those assessment scores are coming back automatically. People are not having to administer this work. You know, we're dealing with thousands of candidates, and we've got something that's really efficient, so that when the recruiter receives the outcome of those assessments, they know where to prioritize their time, and it's much further down in kind of the recruitment process, so that again we're really driving the right activity at the right point. And then probably the last piece that I would kind of reference here is, I talked to us about this before, what we're also seeing is the need to up the ante on keep warm, because yes, reneges and declines, they are a thing. Candidates are naturally holding on to multiple offers. They're happy to do so, and in some cases they're accepting offers and continuing with the recruitment processes, which wasn't a behavior we saw necessarily 5-10 years ago. You know, this is more prevalent now. So we are upping the ante on keep warm engagement activity, obviously to reduce that, but the work readiness piece that I talked about as well, we see that as a double-edged sword. So I think those are some of the key points that I would call out when it comes to this piece.
That's great. Thanks, James. Tom, if I can turn it over to you. James was talking quite extensively there around some of the efficiencies gained through automation. I think some of the concerns that may present themselves from organizations that are looking to do something similar would be around, you know, questions such as, does this increase the risk of bias or unethical AI through going to a more highly automated approach?
I mean, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't necessarily increase the risk of bias, because if the tool is demonstrating a bias, it's there if you're using it automated or unautomated. But I guess the risk of, or the extent of the negative impact increases, of course. If you turn on your tool on a Friday afternoon, gone home for the weekend, come Monday morning, 1,000 people have been, you know, flooded or rejected by your process, and you realize, oops, it shouldn't have been doing something, then of course that's more problematic. I think, you know, of course, it's always important to vet any tool and vet any vendor and ask them questions about how they support ethical AI. And again, we're well beyond the time of them saying, oh, we've got a framework on a web page somewhere, go and look at it. You want to see them actually showing clear action against the things that they stand for. But equally, you know, you don't have to go straight in off the deep end and automate everything. You can, you know, we often see that our clients, they'll crawl, they'll walk, and then they'll run. They'll start by using it in a small area, have the scores there, but you know, they're informing things, helping prioritize. Then actually you can build confidence in the tool, see it's doing what it should and it's working for you as you expected. Then of course you can start upping how much you let the tool take care of and give time back to your recruiting team. So, you know, we do often get asked that. People say, oh, you know, but do we have to, you know, set a pass mark? Do we have to auto reject candidates? Like, absolutely not. Like, you can decide how much of this you're willing to give to the AI or the tool straight away, how much risk you're willing to take, depending on your specific needs, specific challenges. There's no one size fits all approach to this.
That's great. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so let's move on to the next theme, and that is around the global acceptance of AI. The data shows that AI is being cautiously adopted globally, and its use is gathering pace. However, most organizations are still really at the early stages of their journey. That currently it's predominantly being used in pre-screening and psychometric assessments by recruiters. But for candidates, it's more around writing resumes and cover letters for students. Speed, efficiency, and productivity are the most common use case. And that although AI is growing in its adoption, employees are keen to maintain a human element to their recruiting process. So getting that balance right is important. So some sort of statistics that came out from the research. So first off, that energy and engineering sectors use the most AI in the UK at 45% of organizations. Psychometric assessments and video interviewing were the most common use case globally. But employers still have concerns around AI's reliability at 63%, potential for bias in decision making at 55%, and cheating on assessments at 65%. And certainly all of that resonates with me in terms of the customers that I go out and meet on a regular basis that are very interested to talk about AI and how it should work within their hiring process. So Tom, if I can hand it over to you to start with, could you just take a moment to explain the type of AI that exists in recruitment tools today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so most of the AI you're going to find in recruitment tools tends to be, I guess, some of the more conservative approaches. I think everyone thinks, so the minute you say AI, your mind starts to wander to sci-fi films and all this crazy stuff going on. But for the most part, a lot of AI really just boils down to essentially machine learning, which is just some more advanced analytics and predictions. It's mostly going to be supervised. So essentially, there's a human in the loop who has kind of labeled the data. They said, look, this is what these numbers refer to, this is what this refers to. You can use this, you can't use this. Now sort of learn from it and help us build a better prediction tool. We have, which is called unsupervised learning, is when you don't label it, you kind of throw it all at the AI and say, look, find whatever you can. Now this is advantageous because essentially it can learn things that the human didn't identify and kind of pre-label it on. However, it's a little bit more dangerous, I dare you could say, because you can't necessarily control what it's learning and what it's using. And so you do get the risk that, particularly in recruitment process, it might be picking up things relating to gender and ethnicity or other protected characteristics that then it might factor into the prediction model. So you tend to see it being more labeled approaches for regressions or classifications of candidates. You also tend to see it being mostly what we call static. So it learns or is trained at a specific point in time, and it is unchanged until kind of the decision is made to retrain it or teach it some new things with new data. I think people often have an assumption that AI means it is constantly learning. It's a dynamic system. Anytime it's presented with new information, it learns from that and factors it into its model. And again, in some ways it is advantageous because it can be very up to date and it can learn make some really powerful, complex relationships. But again, you run the risk that you've lost control of what it's learning and therefore what's informing the decisions that it's made. So in our space, in the recruitment area, this is high stakes. It's quite a controlled space. It's relatively litigious. And so, you're not really going to see some of the more exploratory approaches to AI. It's typically going to be more static, more supervised to make sure that whoever's developed the technology and is using it isn't going to run themselves into trouble.
Yeah. So one of the things that I encounter when I'm out meeting clients is around you talk about AI and then you immediately kind of the conversation moves to cheating. And so I know we spend a lot of time talking to clients around the myths that exist around bias and cheating. Could you perhaps sort of share some of the ones that are top of mind for you that you'd like to kind of like put the record straight on for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the cheating side, a lot of that relates to things around, sort of asynchronous video interviews. So when you have that on-demand candidates record a response in their own time, well, hold on, you can just go online, you can find the questions, you can find model answers, you can find people sharing content online saying, hey, this is how to pass your interview. We've done a lot of work around that, around detecting similarities in candidate responses. We can do pretty powerful analytics to determine, hey, these two people applying for the same job, there's a suspiciously high degree of similarity in certain areas between their responses. And actually, to be honest, sometimes people are just out and out reading a script. They're not even trying to hide it, having reviewed a large number of these myself. The thing is that it tends not to be very effective. The individuals who flag on these sorts of analyses are typically scoring well below kind of the group average on our assessment tools. So the model answers or the scripts that are out there aren't particularly good or effective. And I always say to clients, I said, well, what is a candidate's motivation to help other candidates applying for the same job as them? If I was a smart candidate, I would put out a terrible answer and say, hey, this is how I got my job at so-and-so, and throw other people off the scent perhaps. And maybe that's what's going on. I think obviously with the Gen AI conversation becomes a bit more tricky, just because it is so constantly evolving. And the Gen AI does continue to develop, but we're still not seeing any or any evidence that it's able to produce really high scoring and still personalized responses. Because remember, it's good at producing good general responses, but of course a candidate is not, a candidate's not assessed in a vacuum on that one step. Oh, here's my interview question, and it's ignored. It's still going to be expected to perhaps relate to part of their application or their CV or their cover letter if you're still using that. And it's also not going to be the only step in the hiring process. And so the response has to still be personal enough that then later at assessment center, second stage interview, final interviews, that they can kind of still stand it up if it's kind of explored in greater detail. So Gen AI can certainly help with some tailoring of it. And we can see it effectively remove a kind of a bad response to being an average response, but we're not seeing evidence that the top responses that are coming through are being really driven by Gen AI. We can track our assessment scores on a daily basis. We aren't seeing any upward trend in it yet, but as I said, we know it's improving at a rapid rate, and certainly at SIOP, the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology conference last month in Chicago, big talking points around how do we future-proof hiring processes and assessments against the growing capability of Gen AI. You also touched on bias, and of course bias is the other. You can't say AI in a sentence and algorithmic biased and not expect to be part of it. I mean, the idea that kind of all AI is biased or is more biased than humans is a little bit of a, perhaps I sometimes one of its self-preservation from humans saying, oh, AI is great, but it's so biased, it's so terrible. But we've got to remember that AI learns from human-generated data. So AI is only as biased as the humans it's learning from, right? The advantage you have with AI is that you can actually examine it and understand where and why it's being biased. You can understand, okay, this is some data it's factoring into the prediction, and that's actually causing the problem. And you can remove it or you can tone it down. It's much harder to do that as a human. We might have some awareness of our own biases or prejudices, but it's very hard for us to say with confidence, oh, I've completely turned that off for the sake of this interview. If you're a Manchester City fan and you see a Man United poster on the wall of a candidate, can you honestly say that that's not going to factor the slightest bit into your decision making or your thought process about that individual? It probably is a little bit. And so that is the advantage, is that AI certainly has a high risk of bias and can apply that bias at scale, but it has a greater potential, I would say, to actually become bias free. Whereas us humans who are much more complex in our thought process, actually, we can't really do that in the same way.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. So just one more question for you, Tom, if I may. I mentioned a little earlier on about many orgs still being at the very early stage of their journey with AI. And I kind of take that to mean, to an extent, a level of acceptance that it's here to stay. But that, perhaps there's people on the call today that are thinking, okay, I know I need to move forward with AI in my hiring process, but where do I start? So could you perhaps kind of give some guidance in terms of what a good starting point would be?
I mean, my biggest advice is, don't get AI FOMO. That's something we've seen for years, I'd say. My time at HireVue, don't panic that everyone else or competitors have got it, and send someone off with 5 magic beans to market to bring back some AI, regardless of what it is. It's still a tool. It still requires a process shift. It still requires change management. It still requires your team to be on board and use it for you to actually assess what is worthwhile doing. Should we roll it out at scale? Whatever it may be. So it comes down to finding a genuine challenge, whether it is quality, whether it is volumes, whether it is your recruiter workload, so that then it's actually providing a genuine solution to that challenge, solution to that problem. That way, your team are going to be on board with saying, oh, hey, this is going to make my life easier. Sure, I'll invest the time to use it and try and adopt it and make it my part of my daily activities. If it's kind of thrown in there just as, hey, we're trying to trial this tool, please use it, pretty please, they're not going to use it. You're not going to get a fair assessment of how useful this is and actually kind of miss out potentially on some of its capabilities. So as you kind of alluded to, I said earlier, crawl, walk, run. Don't think you have to jump off the end, automate something big, start replacing people or anything like that. Just start incorporating it in a genuine need for your particular use case and build and grow it from there.
Thanks, Tom. James, if I can turn it over to you now, I'd love to get your thoughts on the data, and also if you could perhaps share how you're using AI today in your hiring process at WTW.
Yeah, sure. So when we rolled out HireVue assessments, this was our first exploration of AI, actually, and use of AI. And it was certainly mine in terms of utilizing it in a recruitment process. And I think some of the points that Tom makes are really interesting. And I can't, having rolled out new assessment processes a number of times in my career, I can't stress enough how important the job or success analysis is, whether it's AI enabled or not, because it comes back to my point earlier, which is about a true north. If you are really clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve in terms of your objectives and your priorities, it drives the right questions and the right rigor and exploration through the rollout of that project. It's in my experience, assessment is probably the place where you need to have the most rigor. And when it comes to AI, we found that there was a lot of work to do to really understand the level of adverse impact that was in place, or existing. And you've mentioned there about whether or not there's bias built in. I think an assessment provider can provide you reassurance in terms of actually, through the data that they have, how effective the tool is and how that compares to your existing processes. That will really give a level of reassurance. The other aspect as well was about working with our legal function. We did a lot of work. I think, Tom mentioned about it's a fairly litigious kind of topic, and in certain countries it absolutely is, even more so than others. And we had to really get into the depths of what did it mean in terms of protecting us and the level of risk that we were willing to accept. And that took us to a place of needing really clear language and statements and communication to candidates. Transparency is really, really key. So we found that within our kind of the invites and the wording that we have to kind of disclose the nature of the types of questions that we're asking, and some of the skills that we're looking for. For example, you have to be comfortable to do that. You have to publish your what's called a bias audit as well. So you have to be pretty visible in terms of if there is any adverse impact, to what degree, what does that look like? And that has to be within the public domain. And that's things I'd never done in terms of, as a recruitment leader. That level of transparency is really important when rolling out AI. So that was something that the kind of legal lens definitely took us through. And I suppose some of the other kind of lessons that I've had in terms of working and using AI is it's not a silver bullet. It's not something that is going to solve all of your problems. It is more of a enablement tool. It helps and supports recruiter decision making rather than replace it. So my experience of it is it helps prioritize and focus where recruiters spend their energy, rather than saying, right, it's made a decision for me and I don't have to do anything. You still have to kind of spend some time looking at candidates that might not have performed as high as the AI is saying that it has, because there might be a diamond in the rough. There might be somebody that meets all of your typical criteria that has kind of fallen into that category. It's few and far between, but it happens, and it's important that recruiters spend time doing that, and that's also a legal requirement as well. It can't be that the AI can just make the decision for you. So there's lots of different kind of learning points that we're still continuing to go through there when it comes to using this. And I think that once you get a bit further down the line as well, when you've got your own data in terms of how candidates have performed in your, the latter stage of your recruitment process, you can then start to couple that with the data of an assessment provider to look at validation work. And that really helps then give you reassurance and confidence that actually the tool is doing what it says on the tin, and actually the AI is supporting your process in a meaningful way.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. And so how do you see the space evolving, and how might that inform your overall approach to AI at WTW?
I think it's naturally coming into other parts of the recruitment process. The example that I've given you is around screening. It's around screening of video interview responses is how we use this currently. I probably should have said that at the start. But if you take any aspect of where you've got a particularly repetitive process, I think there's opportunity for AI to support. So that might be interview scheduling, for example. That's an obvious place where it could potentially support, but also more broader screening in terms of we're seeing this come in, aren't we, with regards to experience hire and CV screening, for example. I also think there's a generative AI angle to this too. So supporting things like the creation of job descriptions or potentially job adverts, and supporting recruiters in that respect. So I think it is going to be more prevalent, but like I say, for me, it's that true. You need really clear objectives and a true north and evaluation criteria to have the confidence to kind of work it through and into your process, so that you can be really confident when you embed it, you've done all the checks and balances. So yeah, that would be my perspective.
That's great. Thank you, James. So James, Tom, thank you both so much for sharing your insights today. Thanks to ISE, and of course, thanks to our audience. I'm saying all that now because we're going to move into the next section, which is around Q&A. So I'm going to be handing over to Sarah. I think, Sarah, you're going to lead us through this part of the session.
Absolutely am. Thank you, everybody. That's really a lot covered in a short space of time there. So I think you've all done incredibly well. There have been some questions come through. If we don't get to all of them, we've only got 5 minutes left, then please be reassured that, of course, the HireVue team have seen all of these and will respond to you separately. I'm going to start coming back to one of the points on skills-based hiring. This might be a question for you, Tom, but I think the way it's been positioned is that actually this is a positive approach from a diversity perspective and social mobility too. But Claire's asked a question around, have there been any impact evaluations on that in terms of the impact of skills-based hiring on diversity? And are there, essentially, is this an extra barrier for people to get over if they come from a non-traditional background? Any thoughts on that? Is there any evidence? And maybe if not, then James, from kind of your experience, there might be something you can input into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I mean, all tools, whether they claim to be skills-based or whatever their background is, I say should have, but I think nowadays no one will accept someone that hasn't gone through some kind of testing to make sure that there is no negative impact on individuals from a D&I perspective. At the very least, gender, age, ethnicity, but we always say that it's good to look beyond kind of those three at other areas as well. Neurodivergent candidates in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders was a big topic in the US, veterans. So expanding the lens of D&I, of course, is still important, but certainly those three are the most, I guess, heavily protected. I I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting insight. I think the intention is that more skills or competency-based hiring is going to be less also enhanced social mobility if you're eliminating kind of the educational element or the work experience for the sake of experience. I think that's something that James touched on earlier. You know, experience for experience's sake is what we're trying to get rid of. We're not saying don't try and go to a top university. You know, don't strive to get straight A's. But you know, if you've gone to Oxford for 4 years and done a PhD, but actually you spent most of it in the pub playing FIFA, then that's going to come out in the interview. And actually the person who perhaps just went to an evening college whilst, you know, raising their children, but as part of that engaged with, I don't know, these different activities and different things, and they actually developed in these areas, actually that should hopefully come through from the skills-based hiring approach. Whereas historically, you would just be like, well, actually we only hire from top universities. So I think ultimately, unfortunately, it's a societal thing. You're right. If people are coming from lower socioeconomic status, more disadvantaged backgrounds, then yeah, the opportunities to develop those skills are inherently going to be limited. But if we can at least focus on skills and abilities and actually are less concerned of where they've come from, but rather has the person got it and can demonstrate it, then that should actually be increasing that social mobility.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, James, quickly?
Only that, you know, in my experience, yeah, it has improved those metrics,
Yeah.
and a large degree of that is because it's not adding barriers in my mind, it's removing barriers, because it's leveling the playing field, and everybody has to demonstrate capability in the same way rather than through the lens of a CV or what grade they got, whatever, which is materially different. And I think one of the most important things is to play an active role in helping candidates put their best foot forward. I think there are still some organizations that, you know, kind of haven't necessarily grasped that the more you enable and equip candidates, the more likely they are to not only have a positive experience and a perspective of your organization, but to actually demonstrate their best selves. And I see that as the role of an employer. You want to see a candidate at their best. So why not place emphasis on that and setting them up for success in those assessments?
And I think there's been a real shift to that, certainly some of the dialogue at ISE's events over the last couple of years of we're not there 100%, and there is no 100% foolproof system where everybody is completely on a level playing field, but we're definitely seeing a willingness to support candidates, which a very quick last question kind of links into the question about universities in preparing students. So of course, employers have got a role to do in enabling candidates to put their best foot forward, but there's a message out to universities, I think, that employers are wanting to do this, but also how can they support? I guess, I don't know, James, if you've got a view on your relationships with universities globally, and if there's that sort of work readiness question arises.
Yeah, I think my sense is there will always be a purist aspect to a degree course, right? Because that's why you study the degree and the specialism and the, you know, all that kind of, you know, you want to go really deep in terms of that subject matter, absolutely. But there is a horizontal layer to what individuals need to be successful in the world of work, and that horizontal layer that universities need to play a part in supporting that, so that there isn't such a gap between university and the world of work. And what I mean by that is human skills. It's things like communication, it's teamwork, it's resilience, you know, it's all of the above that are relevant no matter what role you do. And I think there's more of a role to play there.
Lovely, thank you. I know there's some really good examples of that out in the UK. Less knowledge about what's happening in the US, but I think, again, universities stepping up to the plate in some areas and trying to enable that a lot more. Again, it's not consistent yet, but let's hope we can move towards that. James, I think we should, with just a minute over, people will be ending their lunch hour and going back to their desks and doing their work. But can I say thank you to you and Tom and to James to say it's been a really interesting session. I know you're going to be able to share the content of the report afterwards. We've recorded this, so people, you can send this to colleagues if they've not been able to join today. Please do pop that out there. And yeah, a last thank you from me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody go and have a wonderful
everyone.
rest of the day and the week, and hopefully we will see you all soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.